I finished 23 books in the month of April, so let's go over them and my thoughts. As always, you can see everything that I'm reading and rating in real time by following me on Goodreads. I am also on Instagram and on TikTok, and I do have my Christian reviews of regular books up and going constantly on my The Journey We Share YouTube page. You can actually find a playlist on my profile with all of my Christian reviews, so you can head there or head to The Journey We Share. Everything will be linked down in the description box. But let's go over these 23 books. I read 23 books in the month of April, so let's go over them and my thoughts. The first book that I read and finished was the fact that I don't know how to say this book after all this time. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This is the first prequel in the Hunger Games series, or original trilogy, now added to. I loved the Hunger Games trilogy so very much. I just devoured it. And I actually started my year this year rereading the Hunger Games trilogy for the first time in a very long time, because I wanted to read the prequels, but I wanted to remember what I was even reading. And I had a great time with the original trilogy, so my goal and my hope was that I would also love these two prequels. I feel okay about The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I think that the book itself felt very slow and very different from the original trilogy. On top of that, it's all about Snow and how he became kind of who he is in the original trilogy. And although I think it's an important piece, I'm not 100% sure it was needed or that I wanted it. Ultimately, I had a hard time keeping up with it and really falling in love with it. And because of that, the ending just kind of fell flat because I wasn't all that invested emotionally in the characters or the character development. Ultimately, I rated it 3 stars. And by the way, this is one of those books that I will say is better in the movie. I really enjoyed the movie, and I enjoyed the movie far more than I enjoyed the book. So there you go. I then read The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This is a book that I read with a group of ladies in my Discord, and I had so much fun doing it alongside them. I have heard about this book for a solid year, and I promise you that every single person has told me the same thing, and I truly did not believe them. I started guessing and kind of figuring out what I thought was happening in this book and what was going to happen, and I was convinced that I had it down, or at least partially down, but the ending was so twisted and so insane, I got none of it, and I was completely wrong about all of it. Because of all that, I had a really fun time reading it because I was totally guessing the entire time and still was completely baffled by the ending and the twist and how it happened. However, I do think that it required a bit of a suspension of belief to get to that ending, and there was one question I have about that ending that was just like, huh? So for that reason, I rated it 4 stars. The first nonfiction I finished of the month was Good Boundaries and Goodbye by Lisa Turkist. Now, I love a book about boundaries, especially from a faith-based perspective. On top of that, this audiobook was so cool because it actually had interviews within it. You could actually hear the interviewer and interviewee in this conversation throughout. I thought it was really well done, and the topics were so good. I rated it 4 stars. You by Caroline Kepney, I think is how you say her last name. I really enjoyed this book. I think it was so similar to the show in a lot of ways, and the audiobook narrator on this book was so incredibly good. However, it is not a thriller book. It is a dark romance book. And literally trying to think it's anything but dark romance will get you into trouble. And I do not read dark romance, not ever. I would not recommend it, and I don't read it at all. You do you, just not for me. And so when I started reading it and just reading how in depth and how explicit it was, I had a really hard time getting through it. The first season of the series is also a lot more graphic with sex than the other ones, but nothing in comparison to the way that this book is. I was told the book was darker. I did not realize it was darker romantically. Ultimately, I rated the book 3 stars, and I will not be reading the rest of the books in the series because now I've learned my lesson. The Honeymoon Crashers by Christina Lauren is the second book in a little tiny duology, if you will. The Honeymoon Crashers is a short story on audiobook only. It is a follow-up to one of the couples that was in The Unhoneymooners. I think that Christina Lauren knows how to write really cute, quick, easy romantic comedies. I think she did well here. And there was not a whole lot that was happening in this book. There's one very short story to tell, and I don't think that it was necessary. However, the audiobook was a fun experience, so I rated it 3 stars. Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong was unbelievable. I picked up this book because it was a book club book for the month, and I thought, okay, I'll check it out. And I've heard incredible things. However, it definitely seemed like it was going to be dark academia, a little bit more writing style that I'm not as fond of. And so I wasn't sure if I was going to be in love with it the way that so many others who talk about this book felt. I was pleasantly surprised to be wrong, and I absolutely cherish this book. The writing style is impeccable. The character development is impeccable. I think that it was so well done, and it tells such a deeper story. This is not just any fantasy story. This is a fantasy story that is telling of a much larger picture and gets into major themes that we always should be discussing. Themes like racism and classism and, society norms and lies of how things it was beautiful. I absolutely loved this book. I actually did an immersive read of it, but it was easy enough for me to follow that I could do an audiobook listen at the same time when I was busy and I couldn't physically read it. So I flew through it so fast. And the magic system in this book was impeccable. It was so adorable and really reminded me of coding in a way, but with magic explored. And I think it was a really unique aspect that I actually could understand, even though I'm not very tech savvy. So I had a great time. Ultimately, I rated this book 5 stars. It was perfect, no notes. I would not go back and change a thing. Even though a lot of people really didn't like the ending, I feel like the ending just continued to tell the story of what needed to happen. It was so good. Saving Noah by Lucinda Berry. I have had this on my list for a very long time. I've been very excited to check it out, although I know it's a very sad book and is meant to make you think of things in an empathetic and different way than what you'd anticipate. I still really was looking forward to the opportunity to learn more about Lucinda Berry's writing and about what she was talking about. It was a very heavy topic. It was a terribly sad book without much of a happy ending or even full closure. The way Lucinda Berry writes endings does not close the door. It does not close the book and you move on with it. It really sits with you, and it's something that you kind of process through for a period of time. Now, I'm not a big crier in books, and I definitely cried at the end of this book. I felt very impacted by the story, and a bit sad with the direction that this family decided to go in. Ultimately, I rated this book 4 stars. The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett was my next read, and I really wanted to love this book. I've seen many people rate this book 5 stars, and to me, this is an example of where I was going in thinking, I'm gonna match what people are feeling about it, and I did not. I did not feel that way at all. I truly struggled with this book so much. I felt like it confused timelines really poorly. I had no idea when and how things were happening, and it left me very confused as to when things were going on. I also think that some of the characters' voices were too similar, and so that made it really hard for me to differentiate. Ultimately, I rated it 2.5 stars. How to Talk Effectively by William Howard was probably one of the worst nonfiction books I've read in a while, and that is saying quite a lot. This nonfiction book felt like it was meant for someone who is an elementary school child. However, it's definitely written for adults. It is so elementary in the way that it talks about how to speak effectively, including things like telling me to say hello to start a conversation. Like, what? So then I thought maybe it was intended for people who are nonverbal. But it's not marketed that way. Nowhere in any of the information is it explained in that way. And so the only thing I took out of it was, how would I explain to my child how to communicate effectively if she doesn't learn it from someone around her? I rated this book 1.5 stars. How to Walk Away by Catherine Senner was so beautiful. I am working my way through Catherine Senner's entire published works. I love her books. I think that they are very easy, quick reads. I tend to love the romance in them and the characters and the relationships. I also really appreciate the depth and the fact that all of her books have been clean so far. So I think all of her romance books are clean. So I really was excited to pick this one up, and I got it on Libby and I listened to it solely on audio, and I'm so glad that I did. From the very moment that I picked this up, I could not put it down. I could not stop. I just felt so invested in the characters. On top of that, this story is so much more detailed than just the relationship itself. It felt more like a fiction in some ways than a romance, and it really carried through an entire story, having the romance be secondary to the storyline. Still important, still great, but not the main point. Ultimately, I had an amazing time reading this book. I highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for a more emotional fiction read. I rated it 4.25 stars. Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney was another book that came up on my Libby hold, and I'm trying to make it through all of Alice Feeney's works as well because I read Rock, Paper, Scissors and loved it. Daisy Darker is very interesting. I was invested from the beginning. I didn't want to put it down. I was interested to see how it all kind of shook out. However, I did guess one of the biggest twists of the entire book, and that made it a little bit cheesy for me because I guessed almost nothing when it came to Rock, Paper, Scissors. I also think that one of the twists that happened was a twist I don't like to read books about. So for those reasons, I rated the book 4 stars. Yellowface by R.F. Kuang is a fiction book, and not too long ago, I heard someone describe a different book and say, oh, it's very similar to Yellowface. Now, I loved that other book to the point that I was nervous to read this book because if it was so similar, then I didn't want to read something that was similar to a book that I already adored. However, I'm happy to report that I don't feel like it was similar at all, and I had such a good time reading this book. Now, R.F. Kuang knows how to write emotion, ugly emotion, emotions like anger and resentment, greed, animosity, in these ways that you're not rooting for the character, but you also want to see how it kind of plays out. Like, it's so fascinating the way these characters develop or experience the world in a way where they are so selfish and openly so. I inhaled this book and wanted to know what happened. I couldn't believe what was going on, and I really disliked the character, but I also really wanted to know what happened and how it happened. I rated this book 4.5 stars. Summer Romance by Annabelle Monaghan is yet another romantic comedy that I was excited to pick up and listen to. I've heard that Annabelle Monaghan is a clean romance writer, and so I was interested to check it out for myself, and I'm happy to report that that is true. At least this book was. I had such a fun time reading this book. I truly rooted for the characters in the story and wanted for that happily ever after. I also really appreciated the fact that this really told the story about like a divorced mom who is single and maybe dating, and what that looks like in those first few months of singleness after you go through a divorce process, about the freedom of a divorce, all of those pieces. I had such a good time reading it. It was very reminiscent of my own story of being single and post-divorce. And although those times are so hard and not something that like are glorified, it's also a reality and an experience. So it felt very true to my life, my experiences, and what I went through, both positively and negatively. I rated the book 4 stars. I read so many books on audio this month, and that's because for 2 solid weeks, I was reading with my eyes only Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I loved this book, but the problem was that the system, the magic system, the complexity of the world, the complexity of the characters were so detailed that sometimes I felt like I was reading a textbook where I really needed to understand everything that was happening or I would miss so much. Usually with a fantasy book, that happens at like 30-40%, and then I can get a hang of it and then I can carry it through. But this book constantly added so much to the overall world and the story and the characters that I could not kind of even tap out or feel like I had a grasp on it. It wasn't until the last 20% where I started to be like, okay, I understand now. Now I'm in it. Now I'm with it. But by then I'd been reading it for almost 2 weeks, and I was like, dang, this is taking me forever. Now, don't get me wrong, Brandon Sanderson knows how to write, and he really knows how to write high fantasy. He does it so well, and this magic system is so cool. It's very science-based, but not so difficult that I can't understand. Like, I did have a concept and an understanding about it, and in the back it does give you a glossary which kind of explains all of these things. However, the slowness of the read for me made it a little bit harder for me to feel like I was super invested in it. I will read the rest of the series. I fully plan on it, and I need to read it soon so I don't forget everything that I read. Ultimately, I rated it 3.5 stars. Now and Not Yet by Ruth Cho Simons was a beautiful nonfiction read. I love the concept of the now and not yet, which is scripturally based. It's all about how we are here in earth and we are living in the now, but we are also hoping for the not yet, hoping for that time in heaven where we get to be in perfection and joy and peace with God. And this was a beautiful story and beautiful nonfiction all about that experience. It was very scripturally based. I think that Ruth is incredible at what she does, and I think she has so much theological depth in these pages. I did think it got a little bit repetitive, and I felt like we probably could have shortened it, which is saying a lot because the book was very, very short. However, I think that the topic just needed either more robust information, maybe some added pieces from other aspects, or it just needed to be made into a smaller book. I rated it 3.5 stars. Out on a Limb by Hannah Bodum Young is a book that I have heard many things about, and I wanted to check it out for myself. I love to go into romance books blind, and so I absolutely did, and had no idea that this was a pregnancy or an accidental pregnancy trope. Therefore, it had some more spice in it than I was anticipating. However, outside of that, I absolutely loved the romance. I loved the relationship. I loved the characters. I loved all of it. It was so beautiful and sweet, and I really found myself just invested in the entire story, on what was happening, on the characters, on where they were going and how they were going to get there. And it was one of those books that when I closed it and when I was done, I did not want it to end. I did not want to move on from that story or from those characters. Like, I wanted them to be my real life friends. I rated it 4 stars. The Return of Ellie Black, I think how you say this author's name is Emiko Jean. If I'm wrong, I'm so very sorry. This book I've seen all over TikTok for so long, so I wanted to check it out for myself, and it did not hit the way that I thought that it would. It has a very interesting premise that is very me. Like, I love a good crime, police, try to figure out what happened after this person returns from being abducted. That sounds fascinating in my book, and that is usually something that I would totally eat up. However, the police officer had a very dull voice. It sounded very robotic, and I had a really hard time staying engaged with the storyline. It felt almost unemotional in a way, even though we're dealing with this heavy emotional topic. I wanted more out of that story. And so then when it came to the ending, even though the ending was very impactful, I was missing the emotion to get me to that ending in an impactful way. Ultimately, I rated it 2.5 stars. Love Mom by Ileana Zander was another book club pick for this month, and it's supposed to be a super fast-paced psychological thriller, and that sounded right up my alley, especially after finishing Mistborn. Like, I needed something quick and easy that wasn't gonna take a whole lot of mental brain effort, so I did an immersive read of it. I liked it in the second half. I think the first half was super slow, and then I think that the ending fell flat. Like, it just all kind of closed up in a very weird way to me. And so ultimately, although I enjoyed that second half and I enjoyed pieces of it, and it was very easy to read, very fast paced, didn't take me a long time, I rated it 3 stars. The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. This book is part of a trilogy. It's the second book in the trilogy, and I think this was the best book of the entire trilogy. I didn't get to finish the third book in the month, but I had started it before the month was out. And I just think this book, The Obelisk Gate itself, was so incredibly well done. The characters they chose to follow and give points of view to were really, really well done. I think I was fascinated from beginning to end. I also felt like the chapters were so heavy. You would finish a chapter and it would just be such an intense experience that I truly had to stop reading, take a breath, and then get back into it. On top of that, the audiobook narrator, because I did an immersive read, was so good, and I think handled the voices really, really well. I loved this book, and I think out of the entire series, by far, it is the best. I rated it 4.25 stars. Winter Garden by Kristen Hanna has come to me very recommended as maybe one of her best books. And I personally have The Nightingale and The Great Alone as like the pillars of perfection when it comes to her published works. And so although I love so much of her other work, nothing has really hit those pinnacles yet. So every time I read a book, I do feel like I'm doing a little bit of a comparison game where it's like, is it gonna match up to what my favorite is? Is it? And this book got really close. I think that the beginning of this book is a bit slow for my liking. And although slow books at the beginning can be good, I also had a hard time really investing in the characters. I was kind of confused on timeline, even though it wasn't that confusing, and who was where, and if it was siblings, and all of that confused me a lot for a second. But then once I got the hang of it, I also felt a lot of frustration for the main character and her experience and what she was going through, but also like how other people were treating her. And it just was tearing me up inside for a little bit. Once we got past that kind of initial portion and I got more into the story of the family, the sisters and the mom and their experiences, I started to really just fall in love with this book. And by the end of this book, I was uncontrollably sobbing. The end of this book is so beautiful. Like, this is some of her best work. And I have found that she tends to write in a few different ways. And this one reminds me of the way she wrote The Four Winds, where like the whole story is emotional and hard and challenging, and you're really trying to understand what's going on. You're frustrated by these characters, but the ending just puts a bow on it in a way that you could not otherwise understand. And that bow is so beautiful. However, I do think that the storyline for this book, I liked even more than I liked for The Four Winds. So ultimately, I rated this 4.75 stars. The House of My Mother by Sherry Franke was the last nonfiction book I read for the month. This is a memoir about the Franke residence and Sherry's personal experience. She's one of the daughters of Ruby Franke. I went into this book knowing it was going to be really hard to read, that it was going to be ultimately kind of tragic and just challenging in a really sad way to see what these children endured and experienced. And I was not mistaken in any of those assumptions. I think it was beautiful, but so hard, truly just so tragic. And there were some pieces at the beginning that maybe felt like they weren't necessary to get the storyline to make sense. And then there was some pieces that felt almost too descriptive and too complicated, maybe for, you know, the general public. It's her story and it's a reality that it happened, and that's so heartbreaking, but just something that kind of like, I don't know if I would have added that in. I still loved the book, and I'm really grateful that Sherry Franke chose to write it and share her experience of living within Ruby Franke's home and what happened even after she went off to college. And ultimately, I rated the book 4 stars. Fair Play by Louise Hegarty. I don't know if I said her name correct at all. This was given to me as an ARC. It came out at the end of April, and so I needed to pick it up. I didn't get to read it before it came out, but I definitely started it. This is a really interesting book. You know, it's a weird book. So the very beginning of this book starts out as like a setup of a murder mystery at a house and a party and over New Year's, and then one of the people die in the story, and then it turns into a murder mystery. But you also have like a breaking of the fourth wall where the author has you actually hearing from these characters when they're reading the book or when they're figuring things out or how murder mysteries can't unfold. It was very unique. I will also say that I had no clue who did it and how it happened. And even when it was explained, I thought that it was going to be a red herring and it wasn't actually going to be the truth. It was just such a weird decision. And then there is like a final chapter, and the final chapter literally makes 0 sense. I have no idea what it meant or what it was intended to mean. I feel like it was just thrown in there for randoms, you know, for no purpose whatsoever. And when I went and looked at the reviews, so many other people said the same thing, that the ending was very weird. Reading some of the reviews, a lot of people said like, this is truly not a thriller. It's really more of a book on grief. And I think that's probably a more accurate depiction. So maybe it was just marketed really poorly, but I did not necessarily enjoy my time. I just thought it was weird. I rated it 2 stars. And the last book that I finished for the month is actually just a reread, and that is ACOTAR, the original, the very beginning, A Court of Thorns and Roses. My friends were doing an ACOTAR read for the first time on my Discord, so I decided to join in and have a good time, but instead of doing it for the whole series, I'm just doing the first 3 books because I didn't really like A Court of Frost and Starlight, and I really don't like A Court of Silver Flames, and I won't read that book again. I did it once, okay? I'm done. I've experienced it. However, I was excited to pick up this book and read it again. The first time I read this book, I rated it 5 stars. I thought it was so good. I love a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I had the best time. But it was interesting that rereading it did not bring to me the same magic. And it's not that I didn't enjoy a reread, because I've reread a few books that I've just like fallen more in love with or just been so obsessed with, but this did not hit the same. The first time I rated it 5 stars, but this time on the reread, I actually rated it 3.5 stars. Like, it was fine, but yeah, I don't know. It's kind of been a fall from grace for me. I'm bummed out about it. Still enjoyed it, still had a fun time, still think it's a great intro into fantasy, but not the same. So those are all the books that I read in the month of April. I would love to know what you read and maybe which of these you were surprised by. Let me know down in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that bell, like, and subscribe so that you can stay up to date in all of my reviews or my recaps as they come up.